Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, I wanted to ask if you have had the chance to check out Quick Media on YouTube. Greg Mattson is one of my favorite Latter-day Saint commentators about how current events and culture interface with the church and its institutions.
A BYU protest took place this week, part of a national protest. In this episode, we are talking about what I call President Nelson's identity hierarchy, that the church is reacting to a trend in history where
Greg understands well the ideological forces at play in today's society, and he does a great job of breaking down how faithful Latter-day Saints should frame the crazy world that we live in. So check him out. Just search for Quick Media, that's CWIC Media, on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe. The renowned 20th century German philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstien made an important observation about the nature of language. He posited that confusion in language is actually at the heart of much, if not most, of the contention between people. And considering we are living in a time that seems more and more contentious, we ought to keep this in mind. Over the past decade, I have spent a lot of time, probably too much, dialoguing with people online about all sorts of controversial topics. And I have found that while genuine disagreements do exist, often, if not most of the time, the disagreements are far smaller than people realize. So often we are just talking past each other because, in a very real sense, we are not speaking the same language. You see, language is a tool we use to convey notions or concepts. For example, we use the word cat to represent the notion of a feline that looks something like this. Now, other languages may use other words like gato, but all those words are describing the same thing. But what happens when we use the same words to convey different notions? For example, when I use the word woman, I am describing an adult human female. But another person may be using woman to describe any person who claims they are a woman. Or how about when people talk about marriage? When I talk about marriage, I am referring to a divinely ordained union of male and female. On the other hand, others may use the word marriage to simply refer to a type of legal contract between any two individuals. So why does this matter? It actually matters immensely. Think about it. If you use the word woman, you are trying to convey to me a notion. If I assume that your notion of woman is the same as mine, then we run into all sorts of problems when you start talking about women having penises. But the reality is that we are just not talking about the same thing. And frankly, per your definition of woman, a woman can have a penis. Also, depending on how one defines marriage, gay people can get married, while in another definition, the notion is simply incoherent. It's like saying that someone is a married bachelor. So what's the problem? Can't people just define words however they want? Well, sure. But what happens when we erase certain notions? The words we use shape how we think about the world, how we categorize it. If a woman is merely any person that claims to be one, then what happens to the category or notion of an adult human female? Does this unique category simply get erased? How about the concept of marriage? A union of male and female simply is a different thing than a union between two men or two women. Or is it? Just a few decades ago, everyone knew there was at very least a difference between a male-female union and a same-sex union. It seemed that, at least on the biological level, this was something that was totally obvious. In addition, the notion of marriage was connected to some kind of transcendent institution. Now, due to our redefinition of the concept or notion of marriage, we have reduced it to what effectively amounts to a legally binding romantic gesture between any two people. And when marriage loses any sort of transcendent quality, a lot of people look at it as, something kind of pointless, just another legal paperwork you have to fill out.
The definition of marriage is just a legal bond. I mean, what is the definition? Legally or formally recognized union of two people as partners in a personal relationship, historically in some jurisdictions, specifically a union between a man and a woman, and in quotes, a happy marriage.
You know, you have people who live together and they say, well, there's no point in getting married. It's because it's all it is, that definition. It's just utterly arbitrary, meaningless paperwork that says, yep, you're in a union and you love each other. I mean, why would you need paperwork to codify the fact that you love each other? It's like
it's a good question.
Well, right, exactly my point. That's why marriage can't be just that, because if it's just that, then it's not anything.
Well, maybe it is just that, and yet it's still rewarding for the people that participate in it, because it is sort of silly that you bring in other people to codify your relationship and to like legally bind each other together. It is kind of crazy.
I don't think it should be any shock that our marriage rates are collapsing. You see, words represent ideas, and ideas shape our world. Good linguistics and clear thinking require distinctions to be made between notions, so that we can be more precise in what we wish to convey by the use of our language. But doesn't language change all the time? Doesn't language evolve? Well, certainly, obviously. But have you ever thought to ask this? And I want you to really think about this. Is our language getting better or worse? Is it becoming more precise or less? Is our language helping us to be more specific and differentiate between different notions? Or is it conflating notions and causing miscommunication and frustration? Also, when dealing with historical writings, like Scripture, for example, the problem of evolving language can cause us to completely alter the intended meaning of the people in the past as we impose our definition of the words on the words used by the authors. Let's consider the following example. Let's say that you left a note at home for your teenage son, telling him to clean his room. When you get home, you find your son is there and his room is not cleaned. He then looks at you and tells you that none of the rooms in the home are actually his, as they technically, legally all belong to you as the homeowner. Now, this may seem like a silly example, but let's look at what he did. Your note was designed to convey a particular notion about a particular room to be cleaned. That is why you wrote those words in the first place. That was the notion that you were trying to convey. A good faith actor will seek to understand the intended meaning of the words of the person speaking or writing to them. A good faith actor is genuinely seeking to understand what the other person means by the words they use, not to impose their notions and agenda often onto other people's words. However, when activists don't like the words of Scripture or the Family Proclamation, they will bastardize the meaning of those words to fit their own agenda. Suddenly, gender in the Family Proclamation is not biological sex at birth, which was clearly the intended meaning, but some other notion that the activist is imposing on the text. Then, suddenly for activists, scriptures and proclamations about marriage are no longer about the sacred union of male and female for the purpose of family and social organization, but instead is just a romantic commitment between any two consenting adults. Suddenly, love goes from a concept about willing the good of the other through sacrifice to simply affirming another person in whatever path they wish to take in life. Do you see how these linguistic changes alter and or even erase certain notions and concepts? Do you see how they can be used to bastardize and corrupt the teachings of the gospel? Now, this is not to say that there are correct definitions per se. It's not wrong for a person to use the word gatto to describe a cat. But when you begin to use the word cat to describe both felines and canines, you end up conflating notions, and that erases the meaningful distinctions between these two different animals. I can't even begin to tell you how often I see conflation happening in language. If you keep your eyes open, you will see it too. I once heard someone say that philosophy is the art of making distinctions. In fact, this is what truth does. It distinguishes or separates truth from falsehood, that which is real from that which is fake. Words and thoughts should be helping us to find the lines between things in reality and represent those realities to others. However, how often do you use words that you only vaguely know what you mean by? We all do this, but we should try not to. Let's use an example. Have you ever used the term identity? Do you know exactly what you mean by that term? Think about it critically. It may not be as clear as you think. Perhaps you think that a person's identity is their genuine sense of self. But what the heck does that mean? If I genuinely feel that I am a black person, does that mean that that is my actual identity? Now, I'm not trying to answer these questions, though I have done so in another video where I talk about my philosophy in relation to identity. My point here is just to show that we oftentimes use words that we don't even fully understand what they mean, and we should think critically about our ideas and the words connected to them. We should speak carefully and precisely. I can't tell you how many times I've asked people what they mean when they say love, and how often I can tell that they've never seriously thought about it. Philosophy is where we flush out what we mean by certain words. We're looking into kind of what is the notion that the word is describing. And there actually is an entire philosophical conversation behind the notion of things like love and what we're talking about when we use that word. It's us trying to clearly paint the picture of the notions that our words point to. And doing this helps us to think more clearly. So when you use or encounter a word that you can't quickly and accurately define, you should take time to understand it. Look at what others have said about that word or notion and how it's portrayed in scriptural stories, and think about it. You intellectually become far sharper when you know exactly what you mean by the words that you use. And frankly, when other people use words that you don't know precisely what they mean by it, you should ask them to explain it. In the end, you will either see that your interlocutor does not know what they mean by what they're saying, and therefore literally and technically don't know what they're talking about, or they'll give you an interesting explanation that may help you to better understand both what they mean by the words that they use, but also perhaps they can provide you with a coherent notion that you can adopt as your own. People use flowery words all the time, like fairness and identity and love and reasonable, etc., etc. And they actually oftentimes, if not most of the time, don't have any idea what they mean by those words. People love to hide behind a linguistic fog and avoid linguistic specificity. Just watch for it, and you'll see it all the time. A real mark of intellectual rigor is linguistic specificity. Never underestimate the power of linguistic specificity. When a person knows specifically what they mean by the words they use and speak about specifics, they show themselves and others that they literally know what they're talking about. Over the course of the past decade, I began to become aware of how often people do not know what they mean by the words that they used. And I also noticed that I had that same weakness in myself. And this helped launch me into a world of philosophical thought. When you realize that you're out using words, that even you don't fully know what you mean by them in the specific, you begin to realize the need to think deeply about the words that you're using so that you can understand precisely what you mean by what you say. So why does any of this matter? It matters because words and language are the tools of the great public discussion happening right now in society. Articles, podcasts, social media posts, and the comment sections that you read and participate in on a daily basis all rely on words. And what you will find is that a massive amount of the words people are using are just buzzwords that people have never thought deeply about. They use words they can't define with any level of meaningful specificity or coherence. And as our society continues to conflate and confuse our language, this problem only gets worse. Don't be one of those people. Ask people what they mean by the words they use, and know what you mean by the words that you use. As Dr. Jordan Peterson says, be precise in your speech. In Greek thought and in New Testament religion, Christ is represented as the Logos, the Word that brings order to chaos. Language can bring light to darkness and clarity to the unclear. Beware of those who corrupt language and create fog with it through contradiction and conflation. When you confuse language, you confuse thought. And when you confuse thought, you confuse actions. So don't give up the linguistic battlefield. It really matters. So just after finishing this video, I had a conversation with Jana Spangler. She's a life coach and active member of the church who is very popular online. She makes appearances on podcasts like Faith Matters and Mormon Stories with John DeLynn and many others. Jana is iconic of a growing group in the church who take what they consider a more progressive approach to the faith. I could not help but think that my conversation with her illustrated many of the points of this video and showcased some of the ways people are changing what it even means to be a Latter-day Saint. See if you notice anything. Can a person retain the label of Catholic, or should they retain the label of Catholic if they reject the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Yeah. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of boundary maintenance. I think that Jesus was trying to teach us something different. I know that the naked pastor is not people are not a big fan of naked pastor, at least in the group. But there is I wish I had an example of it, but there is a picture that he has, a cartoon, and it has men with these giant pencils, and they're drawing these grids and lines. And Jesus is over there with his pencil upside down, and he's erasing the lines.
While I can agree to an extent when I say that there's the arbitrary lines or the lines that can't be there have to be certain lines. I mean, what does it mean to be a Catholic if you don't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Well, talk to Catholics. They don't put those kinds of lines around things. People are Catholic if they want to, and they show up on Easter and Christmas, and maybe not at all, but they still proudly wear that, that label of I'm Catholic. That's what I am.
And I guess,
but I will say
that's
this.
the thing that I run into though is just what does that label mean? If
it means whatever that person,
it's just whatever you want it to mean, then the label becomes meaningless.
Maybe, but maybe they should be meaningless. Maybe we should just be asking, well, what does it mean to you?
So, but to some extent, let's go to the Catholic example. If someone says that they're a Catholic and they don't believe in God and they don't believe in Jesus, well, then why are they adopting that label? They're just creating confusion.
Well, they're creating confusion for some. They may not be in confusion themselves. I mean, the Jewish faith has matured to the point that there are rabbis who are atheists. Like that is acceptable. They have carved out a way.
Well, why don't they call themselves
that.
something different so that we can understand? Like
they probably don't care if you understand.
What was that?
They don't care if you understand. They're doing what they are doing themselves, and if people want an atheistic rabbi, they can go find one.
Well, but if
I don't see any problem with that.
If these identity categories are we just make them up to be whatever that we determine them, rather than language and certain benchmarks that determine a particular identity category, then I mean, I could claim that I'm a Black person. Could I do that?
And of course not. And I'm telling you, I'm not erasing lines. I'm not erasing boundaries, but I am making them broader. So I am making them broader. So I'm guessing if you talk to a rabbi who is an atheist and you said, what is it like to be you? What is it about you that wants to remain, in that role of a rabbi? I'm guessing that we would learn something about that person. And it may change our mind about how strictly we need to have a boundary. Or because my question would be, what's the problem with it? Why do you, Jacob Hansen, need to understand the label of what that atheist Jew is doing?
Just so that I can understand the difference between a person who's an actual believing person in the Yahweh of the Bible and who is, practicing the Jewish law versus someone, and that's who a Jewish rabbi you would expect to be and be a teacher of the Torah.
An Orthodox one,
and then to make a distinction between that person and the person who is something different. It's kind of like the distinction between me saying, we use these distinctions all the time. If I'm going to apply for a scholarship and I say that I'm an African American and I'm not an African American because I don't meet the criteria for what that word means to say you're an African American, I say, but I identify that way. That feels
like a different thing to me. If you are, if the only place I could imagine, I really need to know what kind of rabbi this person is and why they're doing what they're doing is if I am looking for a temple or if I'm looking for a synagogue, I'm looking for a place to go. Then I probably need to understand those things. But why do I care if that's not my thing?
Well, and with it can be very important. For instance, like right now, there's a huge debate going on about what a woman is, right? If I say a woman is an adult human female, that's a particular category. That is a notion of what I mean when I say woman. If someone then says, well, a woman is anyone who identifies as such, then you have altered what that word points to. That word now points to something very different. Just like if you were to say, to be a Black American means that it's anyone who identifies that way. You've you've erased the category of people who are actually African American, or with women, like you've actually erased the linguistic distinction between of an adult human female.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I'm not terrible. I understand the line of thought. I also just don't agree with it. I don't think you have to erase a binary to recognize people who do not conform to the binary. I don't think you have to do that. I don't erase a binary, but I recognize that there are some people who don't conform.
Well, and let me ask. So if somebody came out and said that they were an integral professional life coach and they had done none of the stuff that you had done, and they just claimed that as their title, and you had all sorts of people doing that, and that you then went into a room and said, well, I'm an integral professional coach. That doesn't bother you that people could just claim to be, any title that they want, regardless of if they meet the criteria of that title?
Well, there's claiming if you have a credential attached to something, then that's problematic. I mean, if I go around telling people that I am a licensed social worker, the people at Symmetry Solutions, they're licensed social workers, they're marriage and family therapists, they're people with a certain credential. If I go around telling people I'm a therapist, that's a problem. That's a problem because of my credential and because professionally people come to me, want to know who they're dealing with. I am in a profession where anyone can go out and say I'm a life coach. And that is a thing. And people, when they hear I'm a life coach, often imagine what it is that I'm doing. They think I'm like Tony Robbins and I'm trying to make everyone $1 million. That's not the kind of life coach I am. But
and so those categories matter to you.
Well, because
and the distinction between them matters, correct?
Is a credential. As a credential. In that way, like if somebody is not coming to me for help, or if they are trying to quote me in some way, then it matters. But if you're just calling me a life coach, I don't care.
And so a Latter-day Saint, for instance, does a Latter-day Saint have to believe anything?
I don't know. I know Latter-day Saints that are very confused about what they believe. I still think they're Latter-day Saints.
Well, why would someone claim the title? For instance, let's say that somebody thought that Joseph Smith was a liar, there's no God, that Christ isn't divine, and that person claimed to, I'm a Latter-day Saint. There's no problem with that?
What's the problem?
So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.